Good morning everyone, how's it going today? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be covering MCP clients. In a previous video we covered MCP servers and how they work. Click over here if you haven't seen that one. In this video we're going to be covering the other side, which is how to create the client that is going to communicate with the MCP server. In other words, how to create the agent that is going to be using the tools from the MCP server, and you will see it's actually very straightforward. In other words, this is also going to allow you to integrate MCP server support to your application that you already probably have. And that's what we're going to be doing today. More in detail, what we're going to be covering is how MCP clients work. We're going to be explaining that with a few very nice diagrams that are coming up in a moment. We're going to be creating a complete MCP client in JavaScript. We're going to be integrating it with an Express application, and we're going to be using that one to connect to the MCP server that we created in our previous video. Okay, so that's what we're going to be working today. Next video, we're going to be doing the same thing, but with Python. If that's something that interests you, let me know if that's something that you would like to see in the comments. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, so I have this very neat diagrams right here to show you how to turn your regular chatbot into a chatbot that supports MCP servers. And it's very straightforward, as you will see. I am assuming that you already have a working chatbot with a backend that literally all that it does is that it receives a query from the user, that it sends the query to the language model, gets a response, and then returns the response. Okay, so this one right here, you may have some other data validation here, you may have some authentication services, etc. But I am assuming that you already have a chatbot that does pretty much this. It may have some other toolboxes right here, it may already be an agent. That's okay. All that I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn a very simple vanilla chatbot into a chatbot that supports an MCP server, okay? Or any MCP servers. In order to do this, actually something that has to be quite clear is that even though we are creating an MCP client, we're not actually working on the client side of your application. This is going to be happening wherever you're handling the business logic of your application. In other words, it might probably be happening in the backend of your application. So, for example, let's suppose that you have a chatbot that all it does is it's sort of a clone of ChatGPT without any tools. So you have a user interface. You may say it may be in React or Angular, whatever, and the user sends a query to your application. Your application is going to handle the query, handle authentication, whatever, send the query to the language model. The language model is going to respond. It's going to return a response, and then you're going to get your response back to the user interface, okay? And then your client's going to be very happy because they're talking with the language model through your application. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be turning that into something that looks like this right here, okay? But in order to do that, let me just show you very quickly the process diagram of the starting point of what we're going to be working with. As you see, very, very clear. We're starting with the client that sends a query to the application sends a query to the language model responds to your application, and then your application sends back a response to the user, okay? Very straightforward. Now, let's take a look at what is going to be the result of what we're going to be building right here. And the after is going to look something like this. So, essentially, you have your same application. Again, there may be other processes going on right here, but what you have right here is the same application that receives the query. But as you can see, there are just three main operations that you will add to your logic in order to actually make it compatible with MCP. The first one is we're going to create a method that allows you to connect to an MCP server. And that's probably the more important one. And this one is actually going to be happening at the start of the session, okay? So when you initialize a session with your user, your application is going to connect to the MCP server, and it is going to get from the MCP server the list of tools available in that MCP server. Okay, so let's suppose that here you have a tool called read email, and then you have another tool called write email. Okay, so this MCP server is going to allow you to handle your email inbox. So there you go. So you initialize your application, it creates the connection to your server, it lists the tools that it have available, and now you have those tools within your application. Now what you're going to do is you're going to send the query to your language model, okay? But alongside the query, you're going to append within the request that you're sending to your language model, you're going to append the tools that it has available, okay? So you're going to say, so if the user says, hey, read me the latest email that I have, and you're going to append the tools that it has available, which are read email and write email, the language model may return, instead of just a response, it may return a tool call, okay? So in order to do this, of course, naturally, you're going to need to use a language model that supports tool calling or function calling, okay? Nowadays, pretty much all the language models that are available and that are the latest ones, they all support function calling, but just make sure that it supports more function calling before actually implementing MCP servers. Otherwise, this is not going to work, okay? So once you do that, it will return a tool call instead of the response. The tool call would be something like tool call the read email and read the latest email. And then you yourself are going to execute that function in the MCP server, okay? So you're going to send that tool call to the MCP server. The MCP server is going to return to you the response of that tool call. So it's going to return to you the latest, the content of the latest email, and then you're going to send that back to the language model. And then the language model is going to be able to summarize the latest email to the user, okay? So that's that's going to be happening right here. And if you want a process diagram to make it look a little bit easier, it would look like this. So when you start the session, even before the user sends a query, you start the session and your application is going to initialize the connection with the MCP server, and the MCP server is going to respond with the available tools that it has. In this example, it was read and write an email. Then, once it has those available tools and the application is already set up, it's going to be able to accept a query from the user. The user is going to ask a question of something that involves the tool call. If it doesn't involve a tool, then the language model is going to respond right away without calling a tool call, okay? But if it does, it will call a tool call. It will make a tool call. So the application is going to send the query with the list of the tools available to the language model. The language model is going to respond with a tool call. Then your application is going to send that function call to the MCP server. The MCP server is going to execute that on its side. Then it's going to return the response of the function. And then you're going to send back the response of that function to the language model. And then the language model, it knows that it that it executed a function, and now it got the response, and now it can answer with the response from that function call. And then you get the final answer to the user, okay? So that's essentially all that we're going to be building right here. And let's actually jump into the code to integrate this. We're going to be doing this in JavaScript for now. Usually cover Python, but I feel like most clients might be working with JavaScript in this sense. But I will make a video in Python. If you're interested in that, just let me know in the comments, okay? So let's do that. Okay, so here I have a new directory that I just created, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be initializing the whole project. I'm going to be using npm to initialize this. So there we go. I have my package.json now initialized, and I'm going to be following the default tutorial in this case. So I'm going to be using Anthropic's LLMs. But be sure to use any client for your LLMs that you want. If you're using Grok, Mixtral, OpenAI, whatever, or if you're using LLM frameworks like LangChain or LaMDA, that's also compatible, okay? I'm probably going to do some videos about that if you want. So we're going to be installing the Anthropic SDK. We're going to be installing the MCP SDK, and going to be installing the .env. There you go. And now on the dev side, we're going to be using TypeScript. So I'm going to be installing TypeScript. And there we go. So now we can just touch an index.ts right here. And this is going to be our entry point. Okay. Now something quite useful right here is that we're going to be adding a build script to our package right here. Oops. Like this. And essentially all it's going to do is going to compile TypeScript. Okay, that's all we're going to be doing. So there we go. Now, once we do that, let's just create our TypeScript config file. So tsconfig.json, and this one I'm copying it straight from Anthropic. Very straightforward. Just very straightforward TypeScript config. I'm going to set up the .env right here, and I'm going to be using Anthropic in this case. So an Anthropic API key, and here you're going to add your API key, okay? So I'm just going to rename this one to .example. And this is the one that you're going to be using yourself, and there we go. Now let's actually create the client, okay? So now that we have everything set up, let's just actually go to create our MCP, our Anthropic keys first though. All right, so what we're going to be doing right now is we're going to go to console.anthropic.com. You can create your account if you don't have one yet. I mean, in this case, I'm using a Anthropic LLMs, but feel free to use whichever you want. And I'm just going to create an API key. I'm just going to call it temp because I'm going to delete it right after I record this video. And there we go. Then once we do that, I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to come right here and paste it under the Anthropic API key. Okay, and this is the one that we're going to be using during the whole project. So there we go. That's the setup. Now we can actually start creating our MCP client. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to be doing is let me just import the things that I need to import right here. I told you before I'm going to be using Anthropic, so there we go. So this is going to be Anthropic, the Anthropic SDK, okay. And after that, we're going to be importing the MCP SDK, okay. So MCP SDK right here. So we're going to be importing client from here and the std.io client transport right here in order to create the client, okay? And there we go. That's all that we actually need. We're going to need .env. And just for this example, I'm going to be using, like in the tutorial, the readline. It's essentially just like the input command in Python, where you add an input to your terminal. But this ideally would work within an Express server. Okay, we're going to be turning this into an Express server in just a few minutes. So there we go. Once we have imported everything, we can just initialize the .env config with our .config right here. Actually, let me just. This is not going to be the example anymore. It's going to be the actual .env. There we go. And then after that, let's just initialize the Anthropic API key with the process from Anthropic. If there is no Anthropic API key, we're going to throw an error. Okay, just there we go. And now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be initializing a class called MCP Client. Okay, and it's going to look something like this. In it, we're going to be first initializing a few properties. They're going to look like this. We're going to initialize the MCP client. We're going to initialize Anthropic. This one is going to be the LLM to make it a little bit more agnostic. And we're going to be initializing the transport, the client transport. We're going to be seeing how that works later. And then the list of the array of tools that we're going to be having available, okay? And then we're just going to set up a constructor right here, which is going to look something like this. So let's just turn this into an LLM. So the constructor is going to initialize the LLM from the Anthropic SDK, and it's going to initialize the MCP client from the MCP SDK like this, okay? So far, that's what we're going to be building with the constructor. And after we have finished the constructor, we're going to create a couple of methods that are going to be quite important. The first one is going to be the one that's going to connect you to the MCP server, and the other one is going to be the one that processes the query, okay? So these are the most important two methods that we're going to be implementing, and actually the two methods that I told you about before in the when I explained the MCP client concept, okay? This one is going to make the connection to the MCP server and get the tools, and this one right here is going to process the query and send the tool call back to the MCP server if there is any tool call, okay? So let's start with those. All right, so what we're going to be doing now is we're going to create the method that allows us to connect to our MCP server. And this one's going to be called like this, connect to server. I'll just close this like this. And to be clear, this method right here is going to take the script, the server path of our MCP server. So this is going to allow us to connect to the server that we created in the past video. And to be very clear, this is actually what's going to be happening at the initialization, at the setup of the application, okay? So when we start a session with the app, our app is going to initialize the connection to the MCP server, and the MCP server is going to return the available tools that our app has, okay? So that's what is going to be happening right here. So let's create that. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to handle the case in which our server is written in Python or in JavaScript. This is only relevant if you're running your server locally, not if you're running the server, if you're like calling it from a Docker container or something like that. But if you created the server like we did in the previous video, this is useful in order to handle if it was written with Python, with JavaScript, whatever, okay? And after that, what we're going to do is we're going to initialize the transport system. Now, not want to get very much into details right here, but the transport system is essentially what allows you to actually connect to the MCP server. And you have this very, very straightforward SDK from Anthropic that allows you to do that. So you initialize the transport, this transport equals stdio client transport, and you're going to pass in the command. The command is the one that we initialized right here. Essentially, it is going to look something like Python, and then the path to your server, and this is essentially all that it's going to look like, or node if it is a node server, right? So that's essentially all that it's going to look like. In our case, it's going to be Python because the previous server that we built it in Python. And then the arguments are the ones that are going to be right after the server that we added, okay? That we're passing in as a script, as a path right here. So there you go. Now that we have the transport, something very important that is actually wrong in the documentation is that you have to connect to the MCP server like this. And now if you do it like this, it's going to not work because naturally the connect method right here returns a promise. So you're going to have to await it in order for it to work. Okay, so this await was not in the documentation. Just remember to add it, otherwise it will not work. So there you go. Now that you are connected to the MCP server, you can now register the tools that you're going to be using, okay? And it's very straightforward. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to call, like this. So we're going to initialize our tools result, and we're going to just call the method list tools from the MCP server that we initialized above, okay? We initialized it up here, remember? We initialized it from here. And we now connected to it, and now we're going to list the tools that we have available. And then we're going to add those tools that we got right here, and we're going to add them to our property of the class. Okay, so here we're going to say that in these tools right here, they're going to become whatever tools we have in our MCP server right here. So the tools is going to be, we're going to map through the results that we got in the tools object right here, and in it we're going to we're going to return an object that is going to have multiple objects that are going to have the tool name, the description, and the input schema. Okay, if you don't know why or how your MCP server knows that, feel free to check out the MCP server's video. That one essentially shows you that you're going to have to add a doc string to your tools and that doc string is going to be converted to the description. The input schema that you add to the documentation as well is going to be added right here, and the name natural is going to be the name of the function that you created. So this is listing the tools in your application. And there you go. Now, just for user experience, we're going to list the tools that we have available, and there we go. So connected to the server with these tools. Now, this is very similar to what you see when you run Claude, for example. You can see that I'm running Claude, and I don't think I have any server right here, do I? MC Claude, MCP list. Oh yeah, no, I did not configure them here. But yeah, I mean, when you start an application that has MCP configured, usually you see a list of the tools that are available in your MCP server. Okay, so this is what that does. So there you go. Now that function effectively does everything that we saw right here. It initializes the connection, responds with the available tools, and it lists the tools that it has available inside your assistant. Okay, so now whenever you send a query to your language model, you're going to be able to send it with those tools, and we're going to see how to do that in a moment. All right, so just a quick word from our sponsor before we continue, and our sponsor is actually myself, because I host this AI Engineer Bootcamp where I teach you how to become an AI engineer. It's actually a complete roadmap with everything you need. And I've been doing this for almost a year already, and it's grown amazingly. But now I'm opening it to a wider public, and that's just so great. So in it, you will get to master the fundamentals of AI engineering. You will get to learn with hands-on projects. You will get to access a community of wonderful people. Can't believe I am so lucky to actually get to hang out with them. And they are actually going through the same journey as you, as everyone here. So it's just a great part. You get unlimited course updates, and you get monthly workshops to actually try the new technologies that are coming out every month. And you get live weekly Q&A calls with me, where I can help you out if you ever get stuck during the course material. Okay, the curriculum is pretty large already, and it's constantly growing. And the community is already quite big. So I'm sure that everyone here would be very happy to have you be a part of the community. If you're interested in that, click the link in the description to join the waitlist. And yeah, I can't wait to see you there. I'm opening that very soon, so be sure to join the waitlist to learn when it's open. Okay? See you there then. And without any further info, let's get back to the video. All right, so what we're going to be doing right now is let's just create a makeshift interface in order to chat with it, okay? And I'm going to add it as a method right here. This is what the guys at Anthropic did. It's very straightforward, just a very quick chat loop that works in the terminal. We're using readline to process each line, kind of as an input from Python, just logging that everything's correct and creating an infinite loop until someone says quit or just returns an empty message. And yeah, this is essentially just going to allow us to have a chatbot within the terminal. Okay, and then just create the very quick async method for cleaning up the whole mess, just to close the connection to the MCP server quite important once you finish the session, okay? So there you go. After that, we can just run the whole thing by creating this main function. So what we're going to be doing is this file is actually going to be executed using node, then the path to this file, and then as argument, it is going to take the location of our MCP server. And this is what this does right here. It's going to process that argument and it's going to pass it into the MCP server with that argument right there. Okay, essentially that's all that it's going on right here. Here we're initializing our own class that we created above, and we're connecting to the server naturally, as I told you before. Then we're creating the chat loop, and then by the end we just clean up the whole thing. Let me just save this, and let's try to connect to the MCP server that I had created in the previous example, right? So in order to do that, I am working locally, so I'm going to have to activate the environment for the documentation MCP server. So in case you did not watch the previous video, that video we created an MCP server that allows your LLM to look for the latest documentation of a few libraries and use that latest documentation before suggesting any code to you, so that you always have the latest code available. It's a very educational MCP server, very educational project. It's not supposed to be a production level MCP server or anything for that matter, but it shows you how it works. Okay, so there we go. We have enabled the documentation virtual environment because that one was built with Python. And now what we can do is we can, first of all, we can npm run build to actually create the build of our TypeScript server that we just created. And once that we have that, we can actually execute it using Node. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to execute the index.js that was just, created here under build. And as an argument, remember that it is supposed to take in the path to my server that I want to connect to. And in this case, that server is documentation inside the documentation directory at main.py. So that's how this is going to work. So I'm going to click enter, and there you go. So I can see that I'm connected to the server with this tools, get docs, and I had a debug search tool over there as well. So here if I say, hello, how are you? You can see that it is essentially just responding without calling any tool. But if I ask it for the latest documentation of any library, so what is the latest way to implement Chroma DB in Llama index? Now it should use a tool call in this case. So there you go, processing request of type call tool request. There you go. And now it is actually reading the response from our tool call, and now it is returning to us the actual answer. So there you go. So the actual answer contains, I'll search the Llama index documentation, calling the tool, and now that it had all that information, it can return the information to us. Okay. So this call tool, get docs with arguments, ChromaDB, implementation, vector store, etc. This, remember, it is exactly what we coded right here. Right here. Where is it? Here. So when we call a tool, we add to the final text, calling tool, blah, 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 with arguments, yada, yada. There you go. And that's exactly what happened right here. Okay. So there you go. Now you have actually created an MCP client. Now let's just look very quickly at how an Express server would look with this logic right here. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to create a new branch real quick, just to create the Express application. So if you want to see the code for the Express application, go to the GitHub server, to the GitHub repository, and open the Express app branch. Okay. So I have created this new branch right here. It's called Express App. There we go. And here is where the server is going to be. Okay. So first things first, I am going to have to, not this. First things first, I am going to have to install Express and its types for everything to work. Okay. And there we go. So I just did that. And now let me show you what the Express application looks like. So the Express application is right here like this. So I'm just going to paste this right here. And there we go. So I have the same thing as before, my Anthropic SDK. I have added Express naturally. And as you can see, not much has changed. So I initialize Anthropic again. I have here my MCP. I renamed it Anthropic for some reason, so I'm just going to name it LLM again. My transport, there we go. Everything seems to be correct. The constructor has not changed at all, so that's convenient. And here we have my connect to server function that we had before, and it hasn't changed either. So everything seems to be in order. We initialize the connection, and then we get the tools. Then we list the tools in our property that we created right here. Okay. After that, we have the process query method, which does the same thing as we did before. In that case, nothing has changed. Let me see what changed. Just the comments. Yeah, just the comments have changed, so not much. And there we go. So as you can see, everything is exactly the same as before. Yeah, so now we can actually use it. So we have the cleanup method right here. So there you go. And now the interesting part actually comes right here. So I'm going to minimize, I'm going to toggle this right here. And I'm going to show you this part right here, which is the actual Express application. Okay. So we have first, when we initialize the entire application, we are going to initialize it on Express, set the port, set up the middleware, and we connect to server first. Okay. And again, just like before, we're going to be using the path to the server as an argument. Just created a very quick endpoint right here for /health, just to see that the server is up. And here we have the chat handler, which is going to be the post request handler right here under the chat endpoint. Okay. And essentially all that this does is it validates the query that you send to that endpoint, and then just calls from the MCP client the process query method. And that's all there is to it. Then returns the response. That's all we got. All you need in order to have an Express application that runs with an MCP client. And then we just initialize the listen port right here on the port 3000. And then when the process ends, we just close the connection to the MCP client, and that's all. Okay. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to do npm run build like this. So there you go. Now this build should now be the actual build that I have from the Express application. And now I can actually do this right here. So node, I'm going to run this one right here, and I'm going to run it with my server that I did before. So there you go, connected to the server with these tools, and now I have my chat endpoint. Okay. So let's just take a look at it. So I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to send a GET request to it from here. And there we go. Let's just create a new request, call it from here. And there we go. So we get OK, and we get that the tools are get tools and debug research in my server. So that looks great to me. Okay, perfect. Now let's take a look at the chat endpoint. And the chat endpoint is called chat like this. This is essentially just an API, an HTTP client, very straightforward. And this one's a post request. And we are going to send a query that is going to be, tell me the latest integration with Chroma DB and Llama index. Let's go with line chain this time. LangChain. There we go. So if I run this right here, it should take a little bit more because it's actually executing the call. And let's see what it returns. So there we go. So we have the response from the assistant. We see that it searched the LangChain documentation for information. Then it called the get docs from the MCP server with these arguments right here. It got the response, and here are the points to consider. I mean, this is of course just not a very user experience friendly way to query this API, but you can see this is the beginning of an assistant that actually has access to an MCP server, and I hope that this is useful for you. Okay, so there you go. I'm going to put the whole GitHub repository online for you to check it out, and let me know what you think. Okay, all right, so there we go. So there you go. We have successfully understood how MCP clients work, how they connect to your MCP server, how to implement the MCP client logic into your application. And as you can see, it is very straightforward. All you have to do is create the connection to the MCP server, add the tools of the MCP server into your application. And whenever you call your language model, add those tools to your language model. Now, something to keep in mind is that each LLM provider may have a different schema for sending the tools, so you can check out the schema for each LLM provider, or you can use an LLM framework such as LangChain or Llama Index to deal with that. Okay, so and then if we deal with the tool calls whenever there are any. Okay, if there are any tool calls, we call them from the MCP server and then return the response to the user. So there you go. We created the client in JavaScript, we integrated it within an Express application, and we connected to the previous MCP server that we had created in the previous module, the previous lesson, sorry. So there you go. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know if you want to see the same tutorial in Python. It's also very straightforward. And happy to see you here, and I will see you next time.